Interesting how it starts with God, right? The God of the Hebrew Bible is the same God as the God of the New Testament. If you lose that, you lose everything. So God, Otheos, the one God of Israel. I love that. You show that to your friends from Mark 12, where Jesus is asked in conversation with a friendly Jew, what's the greatest commandment? This absolutely rivets the Old Testament to the New, right? You haven't got to worry about a different God in the New. That's a disaster. No, God spoke and now God speaks. You see that? The same God who spoke in the Old Testament in various ways, in fragmentary ways. Think of different ways that God spoke. Through prophets, what else? Didn't he speak through an angel? A donkey?
The dreams, visions.
Got it. Good, very good. Dreams, visions of different sorts. Some of them amazing. God spoke in different ways, but it was the one God who was speaking long ago to the fathers, that's to say the Israelite fathers, ancestors of the race, in fragmentary ways and different portions, many varied ways, until what date? The last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, about 400 BC. So all the way from Genesis to Malachi, the order of the books that Jesus had was actually different, but it's the same books as you have. The order of the books that Jesus had, you'll tell the students, is given in Luke 24:44, the law, the prophets, and the writings. That's Jesus' Old Testament, exactly the same books as you have in your Hebrew Bible, but in a different order. So the order really doesn't matter that much, but Jesus knew the Hebrew Bible as the law, the prophets, and the writings. That's Luke 24:44. And he gave sermons out of that. He explains, says he, at that Last Supper with him, with the disciples, he was explaining everything about himself from the law, the prophets, and the writings, which is that third section of the Old Testament as Jesus had it, which began with Psalms. And if you're teaching in a Bible college, you need to make sure the students understand this. They should have this information. The Psalms, Proverbs, Job, and then 5 women. Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, which is a woman, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. 5 women there. Isn't that nice? A little group of 5. And then you have Daniel, which is in the writings, Ezra and Nehemiah. And it ends with 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Why? Because it's a summary. 1st and 2nd Chronicles starts with Adam again. Isn't that marvelous? See, this makes sense of the book. People need this kind of education. That's the writing. Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. You have the same books exactly. They're in a different order. But relax, you've got Jesus' Bible right in front of you. That's wonderful. There's no book on the earth that's been studied, analyzed like this. Completely phenomenal. Okay, so God spoke in different ways through the Old Testament. Now, he spoke in the prophets, right? In these last days. And so we are living in the last days, in one sense. And the last days are also future. You can find that both senses. In some sense, the last days are not here. How would you know that? Because in Isaiah chapter 2, it says, in the last days, in the Acharit HaYamim, that's the Hebrew, in the final phase of the days, they're going to beat their swords into plowshares. That hasn't happened. That's in Isaiah 2. That hasn't happened. However, since Jesus came, we are, in a different sense, in the final days, leading up to the final days, if you like. So, in these last days, God has spoken to us in a Son. Not even in his Son, but in a Son. He once spoke in the prophets, now he speaks in a Son. Isn't that wonderful? Wouldn't that make you say, well, maybe the Son wasn't there in the Old Testament? Let's have a little common sense in theology. God once spoke through the prophets. Now in these last days he has spoken in a Son whom is appointed heir of the universe, of all things, through whom, through that Son, he programmed the ages, not the world, the ages. I like that translation. One of them says, he programmed the ages. So God, sitting up there at the beginning, programmed all the series of ages, one after the other, through a Son. Now, it doesn't mean the Son was there. That would be impossible. That would mean that Mary took in a baby from outside. That's evident nonsense. So don't be tempted to contradict Matthew and Luke. But he didn't speak through a Son in the old times. So you can say to your friends, Okay, you believe in a pre-existing son, either an angel, your Jehovah's Witness friends in Jehovah got Angel Michael was really Jesus. That's what they believe. Your job is to get that out of their minds somehow. And then, okay, tell me, well, what was this son, angel, doing in the Old Testament? Where did he speak? I thought the Bible just said he didn't say anything. You got it? This is very easy. None of this is complicated if you have a modicum of common sense, which I didn't have in my Armstrong days. Common sense says that God did not speak in a son in the Old Testament. And if he was really the angel of the Lord, you're going to read something coming immediately which says he never, ever, ever, ever was an angel. Through here, via, by means of, through, with him in mind, clearly, as we would see elsewhere. With him in mind is the sense, right? And that's what you get in Colossians 1. In him all things are created. Not by him. That's a grand mistranslation in Colossians 1:16. Many of your translations say, by Jesus all things are made. Well, now he's the creator, contradicting everything Jesus said about himself. Jesus said that the Father, or this book actually says that God rested on the seventh day. Well, poor old Jesus did all the work. He didn't get to rest. No, that's silly. Actually, Jesus said in Mark 10 there, God who made them male and female. Why don't you say, I made them male and female? So you have to use a little imagination here and common sense. I think Colossians 1 says, with him in mind. James Dunn, the guy who spent his life and his whole profession on analyzing who Jesus is, says, with him in mind, with him in intention, in Colossians 1:16. That's great. Same thing here. Through Jesus, through the Son, who didn't say a word in the Old Testament. He wasn't there, right? Obviously. You got that point. So this through cannot mean that Jesus was there at the creation. And you can say to your friends, okay, if Wisdom, who is Lady Wisdom, by the way, Lady Wisdom was the Son. That's a bit odd, isn't it? We've got a sort of transgender thing going there. It doesn't sound right to me. No, Lady Wisdom, you say, okay, if Wisdom was Jesus, who is Prudence? That's a good question. I, Wisdom, dwell with Prudence. Okay, if Wisdom is Jesus, who was Prudence? You've got to get people to think anew here, and that's one of the ways to do it. Yeah? The one in Psalms, you also have that nice parallel between Word and Spirit, which we had there in Zechariah 7:12. So that's marvelous. God's Spirit, he speaks, and his creative activity, things happen. When God speaks, things happen. So you can say that Jesus is what wisdom became, not what God the Son became. You see the switch. Once you say the Son of God, who began in the womb of his mother, once you read him back onto the Old Testament as God the Son, you've destroyed it. You've actually got two gods then. And monotheism has gone. The rest is chaos. So absolutely right. You can say that Jesus is the embodiment of God's wisdom. If you've seen me, he said, you've seen God. Not meaning I am God, of course, that's just silly, but rather that he is expressive of the Word of God. So that capital letter in John 1:1 needs to go, in the beginning was the Word, little w, not a capital W there, as though it's another person. Then you've got two gods immediately. If you're reading John 1:1, in the beginning was the God the Son, and the God the Son was with God the Father. You've destroyed unitary monotheism. That's the problem we're in. This is the chaos we're in. All right, let's do verse 3 then. He is the radiance of God's glory. He's reflecting. This is what sons are supposed to do. This is all image of God language. You see that? Adam was supposed to have this glorious reflection of God. Take charge of the world. What happened? The devil got in and wrecked the whole thing. So you are the group, the new Adams and Eves, who are going to fix this mess. You want to be in the image of God. Jesus was supremely in the image of God. That's wonderful. Reflecting God. Sons are supposed to reflect their parents. Isn't that nice? They're supposed to follow Dad's trade, learn the art of Dad's trade. They're to obey their fathers, and they're to represent their fathers. That's what a son is supposed to do. So the United Pentecostal Church is not correct when it says that the Son is the Father. He's the image of the Father. No, but those people who say, well, we just believe that Jesus is a mere man. You hear that all the time. He's just a mere man. You're saying, no, what's a mere man? A mere man, an ordinary man, doesn't have no physical father. That's not very ordinary. That's extraordinary. And then, as you're saying now, to be elevated to the right hand. This is where Psalm 110:1 comes in critically. This is the all-time favorite proof text of the Bible. Psalm 110:1, he's going to mention it expressly in a moment. Reflection, he's reflecting God's glory. Or in a mirror, a mirror image, and then we're going to get to the karaktir word, we're coming to that. He's the imprint. That's actually either the tool that makes the imprint or the imprint itself. And they all amount to the same thing. He's a very reflection imprint of God, isn't he? 1 Peter 1:20, he was foreknown. And Jeremiah was also said in 1:5 of Jeremiah to be foreknown. And Christians in 1:2 of 1 Peter are said to be foreknown. All of that's quite clear. So that's not known, but foreknown. There's a vast difference, isn't it? Slain from before the foundation of the world. That's great. He was actually slain, 13:8. Slain in the plan, that is, right, before the foundation of the world. You also have, if you're adding a bunch of notes here, Ephesians 1:4 says that you were foreknown. You were predestined. Christians are predestined. And then 2 Timothy 1:9 says that we received grace before the foundation of the world. We did. Well, putting all that together, you get a massive case, I think. A representation would be the character word, would it? Karaktir?
Yeah.
Karaktir. He's an imprint. It's either the tool that makes the imprint, or it's the imprint itself, of the substance of the Father. Notice the word substance is the Father. In Trinitarianism, substance is all three together. Here, the person is the Father, substance. That's what he is in his essence. If you want to talk about essence, I don't like the word, but if you want to talk about essence, it applies to the Father here. Psalm 110:1. Every time you read of the exaltation of Jesus, every time you read of the right hand of the Father, that is Psalm 110, verse 1. No capital L on the second L, take it off. God spoke not to God. That's a falsehood. Our little book I was showing you said that echad is a noun and it's compound noun. He goes on to say Psalm 101. You've got God talking to God. No, it's all wrong. But you're going to have to change this because the poison has to come out of the system. Okay, so there is his first reference then to the right hand of the Father, of the majesty, that's God the Father, on high. Having become, verse 4 says, how in the world, if you're God, you become better than the angels? I mean, that's not very sensible, is it? No. All you have to say, well, of course, he's God. No, that's a much later development that made everything chaotic. He's become, then, much better than the angels. Now, he's going to argue against the Jehovah's Witnesses, 12 million of them, at your door, who are convinced that Jesus was and is Michael the Archangel, although their founder, Russell, didn't believe that. They're so careless they haven't bothered to find out what the founder said. That was Judge Rutherford, who came in much later and said, no, Jesus is Michael. Wait a minute. This verse is going to be very difficult. Jesus has become much better than the angel. Well, he was an archangel, not an angel. And Sarah on my right here says, yes, a queen bee is still a bee. These are memorable sayings that will change the world. Think about it. A queen bee is still a bee. A major general is some sort of a general, isn't it? Come on now, JWs. That's got to be wrong. So he's become much better than the angels. The devil's not happy with that. As he has inherited a more excellent authority, name. Nothing to do with pronouncing his name as Yahweh or Jehovah or Yahweh or whatever. Nothing whatsoever remotely to do with pronouncing the word correctly in Hebrew. Everything to do with the authority that Jesus has received. Then he goes on. I mean, you think that'd be enough, wouldn't you? Guys, he's so passionate with this. He's got a whole lot more verses to give us yet. So, verse 5 says, let me argue this way, he says. For, that little word, char, this is what I mean. To which of the angels did he ever say, we might paraphrase, to which of any angel at any time did he ever say the following? Today I've begotten you. Church fathers said, today with God means timeless. That's what, if you're a church father, today, that's a bit embarrassing. It's, that's time. Well, God is outside time. Come on. God doesn't know what today means. So when God said to Moses, today you're going to close camp and move on, God meant timelessness. That's just nonsense. They talk about the eternal day here of God. God is beyond time and space, therefore you cannot make anything out of the word today, because we know the Son was eternally begotten, meaning we had a beginningless beginning I say, don't buy that. That's church fathers, that's not Bible.